Yeah, it was a good suggestion. Her name. Got a nice little summer tan.
I know, we've been out in the sun a lot
Big,
lately.
big time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of lucky I get tan pretty easy. So.
Oh, okay. Mhm. You must be a little bit on my side. You never know.
Never know. Yeah, you never know. Could happen. Could be where the curls come from. I don't know.
Say, you might have to go back into history a little bit. Okay. At 5:35, we'll call the meeting to order. The approval of the minutes for August the 2nd, 2023. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to note that these were sent out a little late, but I appreciate the prompt from Mr. Stoltzfus to get them out so that you have them for reference for tonight's discussion for the comprehensive plan. If you do need to take a moment to just briefly look them over, please feel free to. I'm happy to answer any questions too.
So since these were just released and we didn't have a chance to review them in thorough detail prior to the meeting, should we table this until the next meeting?
Certainly, I think that would be appropriate. I wanted to make sure you at least had a draft before you today, just in case you weren't here last week or wanted a refresher on what was discussed. At least we have some documentation of the conversation. But I defer to you on the tabling or the vote. That's completely up to you.
I would like to make a motion to table the minutes for this August 2nd meeting until our next time together.
Mm-hmm. We have a motion to table the meeting.
I'll second
Minutes.
that motion.
And a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Oh, yeah. Aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. Number 3, subdivision and land development. A, 422 Ruby Street, final land development plan.
Mr. Chairman, just give me one moment and I will pull up those materials for you.
Hi, good evening. Brian Cooley with DC Gone Associates, land development consultant on the project. With me Yeah, sorry. Brian Cooley with DC Gone Associates, land development consultant. Along with me tonight is Nick Sura, who's the property owner, and Matt Griffith with Tono Architect, who's the architect on the project. Before I go over any plan information, I'm going to have Nick come up, property owner. He's just going to give a brief description of the property.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Nick Sura. I live here in the city. My wife and I just spent a year renovating a house on the 300 block of West King Street and moved in about 4 weeks ago. So we live within walking distance of this building. We moved a couple years ago from Pittsburgh and I purchased this building around that time. I previously owned a motorcycle shop in Pittsburgh and it's kind of my hobby business, but I'll be a tenant in this building. So I will own the building and also occupy a portion of it. I don't know if you guys have been to the building or not, but this is in the southwest part of the city. It used to be an auto body shop that was almost 17,000 square feet, and historically, it had been quite a busy business, but over the last 5 or 10 years, it's kind of wound down, and although the business was still operating, it was kind of a sleepy building. The building has gone into disrepair, and a number of the repairs that they attempted actually made things worse, we found over the process of evaluating the project. But this project is me. It's not a investors group. I am the only one that's working on it, besides some architects and engineers who I pay very well and have done a very good job. But it's been a somewhat arduous process to go through all the city planning, and we're getting to the finish line to get it going. My hope is that investing in this building, it's kind of a big building in a neighborhood which is relatively residential, but as a personal tenant of the building, I have a vested interest in the other tenants and what they are, with a big focus on trying to bring some community spaces to the building where people can kind of gather from the local community, offer some things to the local community, and also maybe kind of bring a presence to that corner, which has had some unfortunate incidences recently with some shootings and so on, which literally occurred on the doorstep of this building. So happy to answer any other questions, but most of this is more planning detail, so I'll let the architects and engineers go at it.
Okay, yeah, I'll just go over some of the plan items. There's a couple modification requests, and then we can answer any questions the Planning Commission has. So what I'll do is I'll just review the existing condition, which is on the screen. So Prangley Avenue to the north, Ruby Street on the east side or the right side. As Nick mentioned, there's a fair amount of the building that's actually in disrepair. So there's about 2/3 of the building located in the hatch area on the right that will actually be demolished and then rebuilt. The solid hatch area on the left, that part of the building will remain. That building is in good shape, and that's currently where Nick's business is located today. Currently, the site is 100% impervious. Most of it's just the building. There's currently no stormwater facilities on site. One thing to note is there's an existing sewer lateral that runs just along Prangley Avenue. That sewer lateral was installed just a few years ago. There's a couple properties to the left that were redeveloped and renovated. So the sewer services those two buildings. It will service this entire building and then runs to the sewer main located in Ruby Street. There's an on-site easement on this property to accommodate that sewer lateral. Doug, can you go to the next sheet? Yep. So that's the existing conditions. I'll just go over some of the proposed features. So as Nick mentioned, they'll be subdivided into 4 tenant spaces. In the middle, there's the 2 automotive repair tenant spaces. That would be Nick's business. On the left-hand side, we are showing a restaurant distillery. And then on the right-hand side, we are showing a coffee roaster / coffee shop. So you can see that the building used to be this entire triangle, but we are cutting out a portion of the existing building to accommodate 7 on-street parking spaces, which includes 1 handicap space. A couple other things to note is that there's an existing at-grade door for the restaurant distillery, which provides direct access to Prangley Avenue. In addition, on the right-hand side, there's an existing at-grade door which provides access to Ruby Street. Those 2 doors will remain. Again, that provides, like something like a box truck or someone could wheel something into the site from the street. As I mentioned, there's 7 proposed parking spaces. In addition, we are providing a bike rack located along Ruby Street. That would be able to accommodate, I'd say, maybe half a dozen bikes or so. We are showing 5 proposed street trees along Ruby Street. If you notice on the plan, there's some dark hatch areas, a couple along Prangley near the restaurant, another one right outside of the coffee shop, and then there's a few dark hatched areas located along Ruby Street. Those are actually going to be just landscape areas. So as I mentioned, it's 100% impervious, so we're providing 760 square feet of just regular landscape area, which will just enhance the aesthetics of not only the streetscape, but then the building itself. Doug, can you go 2 more sheets? As I mentioned, there's no stormwater on site, so underneath the parking lot, we are proposing an underground storage system. This would be a storage tank system. I would equate it to like milk cartons that are stacked on top of each other. I understand that the city has seen similar projects in the past. So working with the manufacturer and design consultant for that. So that'll mitigate the 2-year net volume increase for the 2-year storm. And it will also mitigate the 1.25 inches of new impervious, which is required by the city stormwater ordinance. Because there's a reduction in impervious, there's an automatically a reduction in stormwater rate for the site. But the stormwater system is designed for volume in the 1.25 inches. Does the Planning Commission have any questions just related to the existing conditions, proposed layout, and the stormwater system?
Yeah, hello. I see a request to not put in sidewalks on the north side of Prangley, but I'm just looking at the labels. Could you explain what exactly you're requesting to not put in sidewalk-wise?
Yes. So, thank you for bringing it. I do apologize. I did not bring up sidewalks. So currently, there's existing sidewalk along Ruby Street, which is in disrepair. Along Prangley Avenue, there's no sidewalk at all. So along Ruby Street, we're going to be proposing, again, the landscape areas, and then redoing the sidewalk along Ruby Street, again, to create a better streetscape with the landscaping. In addition, we will be installing a sidewalk along Prangley Avenue on this property. And that would be for public use, and that'll be ADA accessible. In addition to the sidewalk along Prangley for just city residents, there will also be another sidewalk, which then provides access to the tenant spaces within the building itself. So the modification, based upon my interpretation of the subdivision ordinance, was that you're required to place sidewalk on both sides of an existing street. So again, we're providing sidewalk along Prangley, so the modification request is strictly just to install sidewalk on the north side of Prangley only. We do have the review letter from C. Ed's Davidson. One of the comments in the letter did indicate that waiver is not required. Again, my interpretation did it was, but if it's not, based upon the consultant's review, but that's the reason for the modification, is strictly for the north side of Prangley Avenue only.
So you're saying the side with the other properties, like properties that aren't yours, is what you're requesting?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'll briefly weigh in on that. The way that the land development ordinance is written, I agree. It should be interpreted that it's both sides of the street. However, after speaking to our solicitor, the determination that we came to is that when a new street is constructed, certainly sidewalk, curb, street trees are provided on both sides. However, in a project like this where there's a redevelopment of a property, really those responsibilities end at the center line of the street. So I think that the approval of the modification really is just an administrative process to be clear about what we're allowing, since our ordinance isn't maybe written the way it should be at the moment. And so staff is supportive of that, of the modification for no sidewalks on the north side of Prangley.
Okay. So then my only other question in regards to sidewalks is, when you see a typical public pedestrian pathing their way down the street alongside your property, like, do you expect them to go into where that tenant area is, or can they just shoot straight across where cars might be parked without any concern?
Right, so if you're traveling on the public sidewalk along the front of the building here, you would then just make a right and a left, and then that's the public sidewalk. So that would be outside of any parked vehicles. So there'd be, that's a 5-foot sidewalk that's clear, 5 foot clear for pedestrians.
I just wanted to make sure with all my earlier confusion. Thank you very much.
Problem?
I also see that on the south side, the vertical curb ends. Is there a reason to end the curb instead of continuing it at a lower grade, I guess, until you get to the end?
Yeah, so that was one of the modifications that was requested was not only sidewalk, but then curbing. So right now, we're proposing curbing. Right now, there's an existing handicap sidewalk and ramps that are at the corner. So we're extending the curbing along Prangley and up till you get to the proposed sidewalk. So that landscape area will have the standard 8-inch curb, which will help with landscaping, long-term maintenance and so forth. There's no curbing, obviously, where the parking spaces are. In addition, there's no curbing proposed where the ADA striped area is. There's a second striped area that's next to the ADA accessibility for parking, and that's to allow dumpsters to be loaded and unloaded from the trash truck. So there's no curbing along the parking or those striped areas. In addition, we are not proposing any curbing in this area located just to the north of the restaurant distillery area. As I mentioned before, there's an existing Accolade door which provides direct access to Prangley Avenue. If we were to install curbing in that area, now you've completely cut off any access into that Accolade door. If there's depressed curbing that's placed in that area, that results in two very short segments of curbing. So on the left-hand side, again, there's a proposed landscape area. So there's a proposed door, and then there's a sidewalk that actually comes back toward the back of the building, and that's necessary for the restaurant use. So you'd have about 15 feet where that smaller landscape area is to have vertical curbing, but then you also need to add a handicap ramp up for access, and then the handicap ramp then has to come back down before it gets to this door. So over 15 feet, you essentially have a ramp that comes up, there's no landing area, and then it goes right back down again. So that's one of the many reasons why we're not proposing curbing along that area. The same thing exists on the proposed landscape area just to the right. It's about 20, 25, 26 feet. But again, you're going to have the handicap ramp come up, it's going to be flat, and it's going to have to go back down again in order to meet ADA grade and then going across the sidewalk for the parking areas. A couple other things related to curbing is on the left-hand side, I did mention that there was two properties that were recently renovated. There's no curbing in front of, those two businesses or those two properties. So we basically have very small segments of curbing that would end, and they wouldn't connect to any other curbing that runs adjacent to the west-hand side.
I have a question.
Mhm.
The northeast corner where the landscaping is between the sidewalk and the street, and then the sidewalk jogs out. I'm just curious why the landscaping isn't against the building and the sidewalk to the north of it.
You're referring to switching these two areas? Yep. We did have, I believe that the original design did have that here. However, this existing ramp here, it doesn't really line up with the property line. It's kind of offset a few feet to the south. So if we were to extend sidewalk, this entire ramp would have to be redone and pushed toward the north to line up with the sidewalk that would then connect. And then that really starts to shorten that cartway with Prangley, and then vehicles being able to turn coming to the right here. So that's the reason why they were changed and revised based upon that existing offset.
Chairman, may I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Is there it looks like there's not an ADA ramp connecting the raised sidewalk on the east side on Prangley towards the parking area. You are going from a raised sidewalk there with 6-inch curb down to at grade, is that right? Or is there a grade change that's, yeah, sure. So from this area down, I was expecting maybe to see, but maybe are you sloping this down, or how are you transitioning to the grade sidewalk?
Yeah, so the finished floor elevation of the building and Prangley Avenue in here is very flat. So it's already ADA accessible, but there's no need for any ramps in that area.
Okay,
But it does have the required 5-foot landing at 2% in all directions, similar to the rest of the sidewalk in that area.
thank you. And are there any maintenance concerns or structural concerns over time with having a sidewalk just meet asphalt like that without there being a depressed curb along that? And then maybe the second part of that is, out of curiosity, have you spec'd the sidewalk in that area differently since you'll have cars rolling over it to enter the parking there?
Yeah, as far as speccing it, yes, it'll have, I believe it's 6 inches of concrete rather than the 4 inches that's required. As far as the paving against the concrete, I mean, it'll have the necessary joints for concrete, and then it'll be compacted with the asphalt. So no, I don't see any major concerns for maintenance. There is just one other modification that we requested. I'm sorry, there's two. One is preliminary plan. The other one was street trees. So again, we're providing 5 street trees along Ruby Street, which meets the ordinance requirement based upon the lineal feet of street. However, along Prangley Avenue, it's about 220 lineal feet. That requires 9 street trees. We're requesting a modification not to install any street trees along Prangley. Couple reasons. One is obviously the parking lot, some of the access. But as I mentioned previously, there is that sanitary sewer line that runs, and that would run underneath those landscape areas. And we have extreme concern planting any trees located adjacent to the sanitary sewer lateral because of, servicing the 2 businesses and then this business as well.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I can briefly just go over the city staff recommendation here, if that'd be helpful.
Yes.
Sure. So first, I'll just start by saying city staff is very supportive of this project. We think it's great to see this building, or this area revitalized, and to see a mix of uses come to the neighborhood where there's employment and neighborhood level services for residents of the Southwest. So we do recommend conditional approval of this plan. You have about 9 conditions that are in your packet. I'll just put them up on the screen here for a minute. So we do recommend conditional approval based on the final plan and related construction documents complying with all codes. That's just a standard condition we include. All easement agreements and developers agreements shall be submitted for review and final recordation. The developer has to obtain approvals from any remaining city boards and commissions. Are there any outstanding at this point that you haven't received approval from?
There was a comment about the traffic impact assessment, which I believe the city engineer would have to review.
Okay, so I think that's there just in case. Payment in lieu of all required street trees not installed. And then the developer has to enter into a sidewalk easement agreement. They're meeting the requirement on the south side of Prangley by allowing sidewalk on private property. And a developer's agreement has to be signed. An opinion of probable cost has to be updated and accepted by the engineer. And the developer shall submit a financial guarantee in accordance with that opinion of probable cost. And then finally, the developer shall satisfy any remaining comments from our letter dated August 11th, 2023. Regarding the modifications, we do recommend approving the request for waiver of preliminary plan. city engineering is recommending a denial of the waiver of curbing requirements along the south side of Prangley. That is primarily for separation of pedestrian and vehicle area in that, along that section of Prangley. The third one is recommending approval of the waiver of curb and sidewalk on the north side, as I answered Mr. Dastro's comment. And then the developer paying a fee in lieu of the required trees on Prangley. But we are supportive of those trees not being provided there, given the sewer that's located. Happy to answer any questions from the commission or the developers team. Yeah, do you mind coming to the podium? Just for those who are streaming the meeting, they get to hear your question.
Sure. The question was just regarding the payment for, in lieu of trees being planted. And the question was, what's the cost associated with that? And what does the city use that money for? Does that just go into the general city fund, or does that go to plant trees somewhere else? Or how is that used as what would seem to be a penalty for not planting trees or so on?
Yeah, good question. So the money goes into a reserve fund for the city arborist that rolls over from year to year. So it does not get absorbed into the general fund. It's strictly for tree planting and any accessories for planting. So mulching, staking, wiring, mulching, the composting, those sorts of things. So that money's only spent on tree planting. And we try our best to actively plant trees in the neighborhoods where the developer is getting relief from those, so that the benefit that would be achieved by putting them here can still be realized somewhere in the neighborhood. And you asked another part of that question. Sorry, what?
The cost.
Oh, the cost. Thank you. The cost is estimated on materials and labor of the city. I think in recent, it's been $500, and that may, I would want to defer to the city arborist in terms of that number, but per tree is what that looks like. So we buy our trees wholesale from a nursery. They cost anywhere between, these prices change a lot, but $200 to $300, depending on the species. So I think we've taken the average of that and then factored in material and labor costs on our end.
I have a follow-up question about the curbing requirement.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, could you just provide some rationalization to the denial for the curb waiver requirement on the south side of Prangley? We're providing it in the area where it seems like it makes sense, but there's a small area on the western half or left side of this picture where there would be basically a curb that goes up, a curb that goes down, a curb that goes up, a curb that goes down, and then no curb at the two adjacent properties, which have been developed within the last year and a half, and didn't have that requirement, apparently.
Down here?
Yeah, it just seems like that creates a condition that might be more of an obstacle than actually a separation of traffic in that particular area.
Yeah, and is this the film studio? Is that what that is there?
Correct.
If my memory serves me right, I think that either was not required for land development, or they sought a waiver of it because they weren't constructing anything new. So we have thresholds that we apply to development projects to determine whether it goes through a land development process or not. In some cases, there are conditions that allow them not to proceed through land development. So my recollection is that they would have been exempt from those requirements. So the rationalization for the curb here is, even though this is on private property, what we try to always do is hold that private property sidewalk, because it's under public easement, to the same standards that we would any other public right-of-way sidewalk. So if this were a sidewalk on any other street and there were multiple driveways along the frontage, you're right, the sidewalk would go up and down, and if that ever needed to be reconstructed, they would have to meet city code for ADA ramps or, appropriate driveway aprons. So in this case, city engineering, reviewed this with those specifications in mind, and that was their recommendation, that there be a denial of the modification. So in other words, you would have to meet the specifications of providing that 6-inch curb on the west side of the property. for the parking section, it would just be a depressed curb. It would almost just be a visual delineator. You know, from my understanding, it really wouldn't function in any other way other than that. You're not installing a driveway apron in the same way that we would for a driveway. You'd be, yeah. So, sure.
Just a comment on the curb, and directed towards, I apologize, I can't remember your name.
Brian?
Brian. So I think the only way, and I haven't studied the grades, but I think the only way you could do that is if you flip-flop the landscaped areas that are up against that door with your sidewalk, and that allows you to take up the grade and then let the curb be full through. Have you looked at that so that we don't have to do the up-down thing? I mean, you still have to do the up-down thing, but then the pedestrian's not up against the curb, and it's not like a crazy grade change.
I think if that was the case and the landscaping was against the street, then I think it would alleviate some of that concern from the city with the cars and pedestrians, because now you have a visual break. So I would make the argument that vertical curbing is not necessary if there's landscaping that provides a buffer between the street and the sidewalk. Again, so this area here, there's 15 feet for 2 handicap ramps and a landing area. And if it's typical 8-inch curbing, I am not able to meet ADA requirements in 15 feet. It's engineering, it's impossible from the grade standpoint. Now, if it was like 6-inch curb, perhaps there'd be a small area for a landing, but again, I don't know if that would meet ADA requirements, given the very short distance. As I mentioned, this goes back toward some doors in the restaurant, so this area has to remain completely open and flush with Prangley Avenue in order to wheel in material and so forth. So then the ramp starts just on the corner of the building, but then this door needs to have ADA accessibility along the sidewalk, and the at-grade door, from the at-grade door down to Prangley is only 3 or 4 inch difference from here to here. One other thing to consider is the finished floor elevation of this building is at 376.5, and this portion of the building is remaining. So the street, again, is about 3 or 4 inches lower. We start to put in 6 or 8 inch vertical curbing along the street sidewalk. You're going to have a sidewalk that's higher in some areas than the building itself, which now you start to trap stormwater because then the sidewalk just can't sheet flow out to the street. So I think there's a lot of, access to the building and other factors that I think certainly justify the waiver of curbing in this area. As I mentioned, we did meet with city staff. We did not have any curbing along the street. After the initial submission, we did meet with city staff, and we did change the design to add curbing along this area of Prangley here. And again, that ties into the ADA accessible ramp that's already there. So that curb was added after the initial review in conversations with city staff.
How high is a typical curb?
Well, typically it's 8 inches, but I'm not sure if the city has a provision where it can be 6 inches instead.
Because if it's 6, you have 1 inch of rise for 1 foot of linear, distance for the ADA requirement, is that correct?
Right.
So it would be 6 inches, gives you 12 feet. So you could do it within that 15 feet. But if the curb is, like you're saying, 8 inches, then you can't.
Right, even 6 inches. So when you have a handicap ramp, you can come up at 8.33% maximum slope. But when you get up to the top, you need a landing area because then you're going back down again. Typically, that landing area is a 5-foot landing area that's required. So that's where the distance just isn't there. And a lot of it's the function of this door and the existing at-grade door and that required access to Prangley Avenue. Again, on the other side, it's around 25 feet. So I think there'd be an opportunity, but then again, I think just having one section of 25 feet curbing along this area, I think visually it's not going to look great.
So I got a question. You were talking about, depending on where this curb is and the orientation of it, then stormwater won't go into the street. Your site is managing all the stormwater on site though, correct?
Yeah, so right now, all of the building roof leaders will drain to the stormwater facility. So the stormwater facility does not collect anything from the parking lot or any of the sidewalk. It's all the roof leaders.
Okay.
Yep, so there'd be no change to the stormwater facility itself, but I think there'd be concern from the sidewalk draining to the curb. Stormwater's going to run along that curb, and then it's eventually going to get into Prangley once it gets toward the end of the handicap ramp, and then everything becomes flush.
Okay.
I think that's the concern.
Thank you for that. So I guess my only real question at this point, because we're talking a lot about this section of curbing, how much cost is doing this curbing the way the city's asking by the current ordinances? Like, how much cost will that actually add to the project here?
Well, I'm not a contractor.
Because like curbing's a relatively minimal piece. Like,
Well, it's, minimal compared to what? I mean,
it's an important piece. Like it's important for stormwater tools as well. But I'm just confused. Like, is it that great of a cost that we have to continue hashing this out?
I don't think it's necessarily cost. I think it doesn't work engineering-wise.
So you just think functionally it doesn't?
Functionally, it doesn't work, and then I think it creates a very poor aesthetic.
I'd be interested to hear more about that, but I'm not going to ask any more questions.
But as far as the cost, not only is it the cost in the curbing, it's the cost of the ADA ramps, and then, the warning strips and so forth. So there is certainly additional cost beyond curbing as well.
Would we have the opportunity to, or would you consider potentially withdrawing that waiver or that request for the curbing? You can continue to work with the city engineer for another week or so and come back and see us? Just when, I feel like there's a lot of uncertain and unanswered questions between what the city engineers are recommending in their denial and, your reasoning for it. So I think it may be worthwhile to take a step back. Let's investigate it a little bit further. Let's explore the options and consider how the curbing could potentially be installed or what the best solution is for that curbing, because I don't feel like we have that best solution right now between where the city is and where you are. And I think collaboratively is how we're going to get to the best place.
Ms. Sufer, do you mind if I briefly respond to that? I appreciate your suggestion. I do think that there's some alternatives that city staff could look at and work on with the applicant. Trying to get to the same end, I might suggest, I don't think we've ever done this before, but you could grant the modification conditioned on the city engineer and the applicant coming to a mutually agreeable design. That would at least provide some opportunity for additional discussion, and perhaps then either the client or the developer or the city engineer, change their perspective on the matter, and we can get to a different arrangement. I think that would be my recommendation. So again, it would be a conditional granting of that particular modification.
Yeah, I would certainly support that, and I think it's important just to keep, the project seems exciting for the neighborhood, so I feel like there's good opportunity to it. There's a lot of conversation about curb, and I feel like it could be a simpler solution.
So that would allow us to handle things administratively. You wouldn't have to come back to the planning commission for anything additional. Would the developer be amenable to that?
Yes, we would. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Sure. With that, I'll just reiterate, city staff supports the project and recommends a conditional approval with granting all of the modifications with the one change to modification B, and that would be conditional on mutual agreement between the city engineer and the developer.
Any other comments from the commissioners?
Sorry, can you just say a little bit more about the concern with this potential street trees and the sewer line, is it your concern that the trees would damage the sewer line, or what's the concern?
Yes, that's the main concern. One of the other concerns is the sewer lateral is, so we did stormwater testing. We determined the elevation of the sewer lateral along the parking area in here when we did stormwater testing, up in here. And that lateral, the sewer lateral was only about 2.5 feet deep in that entire area. I think part of that was because it's a gravity line that then goes into Ruby Street, and this area is pretty flat through here. So I think not only the horizontal location of the lateral itself, but then that vertical elevation presented an additional concern.
Thank you.
Any further comment? Any comment from the public? Hearing none.
I'll make a motion to approve the modification of waivers for 422 Ruby Street for the final land development plan, with the exception that we'll approve the request for waiver for preliminary plan submission. We will conditionally approve the request for waiver of curbing requirements along the south side of Prangley Ave, under the circumstances that you and the city's engineer come up with an agreeable design solution. We will approve the request for waiver of curb and sidewalk requirements on the north side, and we've already, we'll approve the trees along Prangley in lieu of, or pay in lieu of trees.
And Ms. Sufer, may I just clarify that also includes the remaining conditions for the land development plan itself and the approval of that too?
Yes.
Thank you.
So we have a motion
I would second.
and a second. Ready for the question? All in favor, let
Aye.
it known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, ayes have it. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you for your time tonight, appreciate it.
B, 216 Harrisburg Avenue, final land development plan of Bartow.
Good evening. My name is Brent Detter with David Miller Associates. We're here for the final land development plan for the Lombardo property located at 216 Harrisburg Avenue. The sketch plan was before you at your planning commission on May 17th of 2023. The project site is in the mixed-use development zone. Harrisburg Avenue is located to the north, North Water Street is to the east, and West James Street is to the south. There are currently 8 individual lots that comprise the project area. Those will all be combined into one resultant lot. The area that are shown in dark red on the screen in front of you are portions of buildings that will be removed. All of those have been approved by the Historic Commission at this point. They've made a recommendation for the removal of the rear of the triplex units and the rear of the Roseman building. A portion of the existing restaurant will be removed, and a good portion of the vacant Penn State Lighting building will be removed, but the building will be built in place there. The areas that are magenta and light pink in color are areas of pavement and concrete that will be removed. Douglas, if you can go to the next slide. So what you're seeing now is the proposed improvement plan. We'll just start along Harrisburg Avenue and work our way in a clockwise fashion. So a majority of the sidewalk along Harrisburg Avenue and curbing will be removed. It's not in good shape right now. All the required street trees and tree wells will be provided along with the brick band along Harrisburg Avenue. Heading south on North Water Street, 90% of that walkway and curbing will be removed. There are two existing ADA ramps, one at the north side of North Water Street and one at the south side of North Water Street, which were recently installed, I'd say, within the last 8 years, and they're in good condition, so we'll be tying into those. Heading along West James Street, again, 80% of that curb and sidewalk will be removed. That will have a 5-foot wide planting area between the curb and the sidewalk, along with a 5-foot wide sidewalk along all of West James Street, except for in locations where there are existing porches or where we have depressed curbs entering the parking lots. Those areas won't have the tree well, and the tree well area gets reduced in size where there's existing porches and steps to allow a clear 5-foot wide sidewalk. From a building expansion, in between the existing Lombardo's restaurant and what was the Penn State Lighting fixture building, there's going to be an expanded kitchen area that will serve a proposed deli and also the existing restaurant. And then the resultant space between what will become the existing deli and a chef's dining area in the existing restaurant becomes a seasonal outdoor dining area. The existing parking lot south of the existing Penn State Lighting facility building will be repaved, basically in the same configuration that is right now. It's a mixture of concrete and asphalt. That'll all be removed and reinstalled as asphalt. An expanded parking area is located on the west side of the existing triplex, which will tie into the existing parking area of the Lombardo's project that fronts along Harrisburg Avenue. And then we also have a trash enclosure that's directly west of the expanded kitchen area. And then there's also a proposed bike rack on the west side of the proposed deli, which will hold 5 parking spaces. We are requesting 3 modifications with the project. The first is along North Water Street. We don't have enough room for a 4-foot wide tree lawn area between the curb and the sidewalk. We are providing, it's approximately 1 foot, maybe 1.5 feet of tree lawn there, but we are providing a 5-foot sidewalk. Along West James Street, we are requesting a reduction of the 5-foot wide planting strip as required in front of the existing triplexes so that we can maintain a 5-foot sidewalk. And then we were also asking for a modification to allow existing street trees to be counted towards the total number of street trees that were required. Based on the street frontage, there are 24 total street trees required. There are 25 proposed, but that includes 5 existing street trees. And the way that the staff has interpreted the ordinance is that 1 street tree is to be planted per 25 lineal feet of street. So even though we're providing more than the required, I believe they're recommending that we pay the fee in lieu of for the 4 that we're not actually planting because the ordinance says to be planted. The approvals we've received so far, we have our water capacity approval, sewer capacity approval, zoning approval. We went to the Historic Commission for the removal of the portions of the building to be demolished that are shown on the plan as submitted. We've gone to the Traffic Commission and received their recommendation. All we're waiting on this point is the utility permit from PennDOT for removal of water laterals and the replacement of a sanitary lateral, and also for the curb and sidewalk work along Harrisburg Avenue, is required to have a PennDOT approval as well, and that's all been submitted, and we're waiting on that review. And we're also just waiting to go to the Shade Tree Commission in September. to just review the proposed street trees. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them at this point.
I got a question I want to ask Mr. Smith. So I thought about bringing this up in the last project, but I'll bring it up now because it's still relevant. Talking about street trees, and you had mentioned like we use the funds as close to the project as we feasibly can. Has a developer ever, or could they potentially, because I'm looking at the other side of Harrisburg Avenue, it's like if they're having trouble locating trees on their project site, could there be an avenue for developers, like make an agreement with like their adjacent neighbors to be like, hey, you have an empty tree well, I have a requirement to fulfill, sign this contract?
Good question. I'm thinking, processing. So I'd have to look at the ordinance in more detail. I think that the way it's written is that they have to be planted along the right-of-way of the property, the frontage that's being developed, or on private property within a public easement. I can't think of anywhere in the code that would allow them to be planted off-site and still meet that requirement, but I might want to scrutinize the language just to be clear about that. In this case, that wasn't proposed, and I think we would need agreement from that landowner, in this case LGH, to know whether they would be open to that. But certainly, we can look into that and file that away for the future. I think it's an interesting idea.
Word, thank you.
I'm looking at the first waiver request, your planting strip. The section on North Water Street currently is wide enough, but the building that you're proposing is what, I'm just kind of clarifying, is going to come up to?
No, there's
It's
not
not-
enough right-of-way there. The right-of-way that's there meets the ordinance requirement. There's not enough right-of-way to create the sidewalk and the planting strip. That's the issue. The building
With the proposed building?
even if the building wasn't there, there's not enough room to do it within the public right-of-way. So we're proposing our street trees along there on private property, and they would be in a street tree easement
Okay.
with a street tree agreement. It's just the planting strip that's not wide enough. So the trees will not be in the planting strip. The trees will be on private property behind the sidewalk in that area. So the ordinance requires a tree lawn area and trees. And it allows that if there's not enough room there, they can be placed on private property as long as there's an easement and agreement, which we are providing.
So city staff is recommending approval of this project. We have, we have a set of conditions we can briefly go over. Again, the final plan has to be in accordance with all city codes and standards.
Hey, Douglas,
Okay.
would you mind if I ask just one more question about the
Yeah.
plan? This is really, really minor, but why does your concrete pad for the dumpster come out so far? Is it a rollout dumpster or?
No, that's just so when the truck comes to pick it up, we don't end up with rutting. So it comes out to cover the front wheels.
Okay.
There's currently extensive rutting in front of their existing trash area, so that's why it comes out so far.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I can just see the 24-foot dimension. I'm like, that's a little odd, but I understand why you did it. Yeah,
The 24-foot dimension is to show the access aisles 24 feet wide. I believe we come out maybe 9 feet to cover
I got you.
the front wheels of that, of the trash truck.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I also have one more question. Can you just point out where the bike parking?
Oh, yeah, sure. So Douglas, do you see where it says the proposed restaurant deli?
Here?
Yep, just to the west of there, there's a small line, and that's enough for 5. It's a Do More bike rack, and we have enough sidewalk width there that a pedestrian can walk past the sidewalks when they're parked perpendicular to the building and still get by. Yeah, I apologize. I turned off a lot of the layout notes, so it was a little easier to see on this slide, so.
Okay, with that, pick up, sorry, these conditions are mislabeled. Should be 1 through 6 here. So I went over the first one. Second one, again, all easements and developers' agreements shall be submitted for review and recordation. The developer has to obtain any approvals from relevant city boards and commissions. In this case, I think only the Shade Tree Commission. Developer has to pay a fee in lieu of all required street trees not installed. That would be 4. The developer has to enter into a street tree easement agreement and final developer's agreement. And then the opinion of probable cause shall be updated and accepted by the city engineer. There are 2 more. Financial guarantee has to be provided in accordance with the opinion of probable cost, and the developer shall address to the city's satisfactions all unsatisfied city comments. Does the development team agree to those conditions? Yes. Okay. Regarding the modifications, we're recommending approval of the waiver of the planting strip. We're recommending approval for the request for installing trees at the rear of the sidewalk and on private property, provided that the developer enters into an easement agreement. And then we recommend denying the request to count the existing trees towards required trees and instead have a payment in lieu of. Primarily, this is really out of equity to other developers and how we've continued to interpret this. The code does need to be updated, I think, to more fairly assess property frontage for a variety of reasons. But we would prefer that we handle that in an equitable way across developments for the time being. So those are our recommendations. Any questions from the applicant or from the commission?
Douglas, I have a question. At the last statement, number 11, says that the developer shall address to the city's satisfaction all unsatisfied city's comments.
Yeah.
Are we talking about city resident comments or city staff?
So these would be staff comments, and apologize for the wording here. Typically, I like to reference a date on the letter, and I think we just sent back
A draft.
a draft, right? Okay, so there's still some very minor technical issues that we're working through. When they're not substantive and we know that we can resolve them, we try not to burden you all with them, and we instead have a catch-all here. Generally, the developer is well aware of what we're asking for, and so they've been willing to agree to that condition as a catch-all comment.
Okay.
Any further comment from the commissioners? Any public comment? Yes.
Tim Stuhlder, 1 United Lancaster. There's been a lot of discussion, I believe, in connection with this project regarding 227 West James. Wondering if that is the existing to remain property at the bottom left, and if it is, what are the plans to remediate it, possibly put it back into use, and if it's not being demolished, does that mean the Historical Commission is free and clear?
This plan has been prepared and submitted as if that portion of the Roseman building is to remain. That is what has been approved by the Historic Commission and represented to the city council at this point in time. So at this point, we have no intent to demolish that building until further applications are made and processed. But what you see is what would be approved at this point in time.
Does the city have any, if it stays without any?
Please. For the streamers.
So it's my understanding there's some concern about the deteriorated condition of the building, so I guess this question might be for Douglas. If nothing is done to this building, is that satisfactory, or might there be a need to remediate the building in some way?
I would need to defer to code officials on that. So I think maybe what you're hinting at is the sort of standard process that buildings go through if they are either remediated or not. Certainly if the developer chooses to remediate this property, we would be reviewing building permits for those uses and applying the zoning code in traditional fashion, et cetera. And if it were to not be remediated and would continue to remain as it is, at some point, a code official would need to review the building or the property and make a determination on its state and whether it's habitable or not. And I'm sure the rest of the process you're familiar with. In worst case scenario, it goes through many steps through the Property Reinvestment Board and onward, that in some cases results in condemnation of the building and then consideration for further action to fix the blight, in other words. So with that, I'll just reiterate, city staff recommends approval subject to all of the conditions and my comments on the modifications.
Any further public comment? Commissioner comment? Have a motion for 216 Harrisburg Avenue, final development plan in Bardos.
All right. I make a motion to approve the final land development plan for 216 Harrisburg Avenue, including SALDO modification waiver requests number 1 and number 2, and that we look at, for number 3, modifying and denying that request to count existing trees towards required trees. As far as the land development plan, I also recommend that we approve 4 through 11 per Douglas's and city staff's comments.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Ready for the question? All in favor, let it known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, ayes have it. Motion carried. Congratulations. Number 4, redevelopment authority of the city of Lancaster, none. Number 5, action on proposed comprehensive plan. City staff requests the commission formally recommend the city council the approval of the proposed comprehensive plan titled Our Future Lancaster, a comprehensive plan of the city of Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to load up my presentation here. Okay. Very exciting to finally be at this point with you all. I'll just say that I've really appreciated our conversation so far. I know we have some more to have this evening. And what I'd like to do with this evening's presentation, and I'll try to keep it on the shorter side, I want to start by just reminding the Planning Commission of its duties as prescribed in the municipality's planning code, and then just very briefly recap our engagement process, and then move on to how city staff has addressed some of the comments that we had at the last Planning Commission meeting. And then, of course, any questions or other content you'd like to dive into, I'm happy to do that. So the municipality's planning code is it's our Bible of planning, basically, in Pennsylvania. It's what describes all of our the legal functions for planning in Pennsylvania. So I pulled out the section in the state code here that is about adoption of the comprehensive plan. So I'll read that to you quickly here. Before adopting or amending a comprehensive plan or any part thereof, the planning agency, that's you all, shall hold at least one public meeting before forwarding the proposed comprehensive plan or amendment thereof to the governing body, being City Council. In reviewing the proposed comprehensive plan, the governing body shall consider the comments of the county, contiguous municipalities, and the school district, as well as the public meeting comments and the recommendations of the municipal planning agency. Again, that's you all. As required by state law, you all are required to review the plan. We've done that at a couple of meetings now, so I just want to let you all know that we're satisfying that. And then there are, of course, some remaining steps mentioned in there. The MPC also requires certain topics be addressed in the comprehensive plan, and I believe that we've met those conditions, but just want you to be aware that there are a variety of topics that are required to be addressed, including land use, housing, the movement of people and goods, community facilities and utilities, explanation of plan organization, discussion of implementation, natural and historic resources, and some other minor issues. So these are our engagement numbers that we presented on May 24th at the launch that we had for the comp plan. We've now surpassed these numbers quite a bit. We'll be providing updated numbers in a final engagement plan that we present to City Council. But of course, I hope at this point the message has been clear that we've really tried to do a lot of engagement with the community and listen to what they've had to say. This is a brief summary of our engagement. I wanted to put this up here because I thought we should all just take stock of the length that this process has been. We started in 2020 with budgeting funds, securing grants, hiring a facilitation specialist. We recruited 17 residents to be a part of our comprehensive plan committee. In winter, spring 2021, we reviewed, we trained the comprehensive plan committee. We issued a request for proposals, hired a primary consultant, selected a primary consultant with the comprehensive plan committee. And then in that summer, we initiated our phase 1 of community engagement. We focused on values and priorities with the community, and we held our first technical advisory committee meeting. In the summer of 2022, we initiated phase 2 of our community engagement, and we focused on land use and design issues, and we held our second technical advisory committee meeting. In 2022, we initiated phase 3 of our, in the winter and fall, of our community engagement, and we focused on policy drafting, and we held our third and final technical advisory committee. We had over 150 local experts who were named in those committees. And then we began drafting policies and key maps. So winter and spring, we completed initial drafts of those policies. We held our May 24th policy presentation at the Ware Center, exceeded our 4,000 in-person interactions, which was our early goal, and nearly 15,000 total interactions. And then summer and fall, phase 4 has been working on the plan drafting and adoption with you all. We released our first draft of the plan. We've been engaging the the Planning Commission, and we will be engaging City Council in that plan adoption. I think you're all familiar with this graphic at this time. I wanted to pull it up because we finally got the colors right and the images, and we tweaked a few things. We continue to work on, making the document as clean and nice as possible. But of course, we have our 5 planning systems that are citywide policies that help drive our policies in the land use section in our Conestoga Riverfront Reimagined. And I just wanted to take a moment to point out this element section and give you an example of what these elements are. You might remember me saying that these elements were expanded to become our community development objectives at the last meeting. So here's just an example. Those elements are kind of like subheaders, and underneath of them, each policies and actions sit. So for Planning System 1, strengthening neighborhoods and housing, we have 4 elements within that section. Here's just a preview of what those statements look like. Housing choice is the first element, and it says facilitate a diversity of housing types, serving a range of household compositions and income levels. And then there are policies and actions underneath that. So at our last meeting, I took notes on some of the conversations that we had, and I wanted to just follow up with you and let you know what we've been doing and thinking through in response to them. So one of the really good questions that we got was around coordination with the school district. Just for context, I want to just remind you and the public that the school district will have a 45-day review period to comment on the plan. Let's see, this is actually a quote from the plan. It says, "The city continues to attract development, including an increasing number of projects geared toward older adults. This growth has brought new buying power to the local economy and increased real estate tax revenue for both the city and the school district without adding students." I put that in here because I think one of the concerns around planning with the school district is really about capacity for schools. And wanted to take stock of the fact that a lot of the increase in residents that we are currently seeing there are both older adults, as mentioned in this comment, which is our fastest growing demographic age-wise in the city. And then also the fact that single-person households are the largest increasing household type in the city as well. And that's really a nationwide pattern too. So in both of those cases, there's tax revenue that's gained, but without the burden of additional children in the schools. And then the third context statement here, I already mentioned, so I'll move on. So the response, I want to let you know that we have made contact with the superintendent's office and have offered a meeting to sit down and review the plan with their team. I'm hoping to set up a meeting during that 45-day review period so that we can review any comments that they might have. And then also just wanted to point out this particular policy, which is currently in the latest draft of the plan, and this was added in response to the conversation that we had 2 weeks ago. So it now reads, planning for schools, work collaboratively with the School District of Lancaster on long-range planning issues, including growth projections, enrollment forecasts and capacity, school facility planning, safe routes to school, and land use issues on and around school campuses. So I think that this was a really good addition to the plan and at the request of you all. One additional note to make there is our Vision Zero implementation that we're working on right now does include a safe routes to school aspect to it. So we'll actually have 3 RFPs being released very shortly, and there's a safe routes to school component for that. Just a little bit more on that. The following stakeholders were engaged in the comp plan process. That it includes Corrine Rios, School District of Lancaster board member, Matt Prezwara, CFO, Dr. Rao, who's the former superintendent, Kem Subedi, he was the former Refugee Center and Community School IU13 staff person. And there are a couple of other policies I threw in here that were already in the plan, but just wanted to draw your attention to them. One is public school partnerships, and that's to deepen our relationship with School District of Lancaster, but especially on graduate and job trends. So this is in our economic development policy system, number 2. And then there's an action that was also in the plan, and that was to conduct a child care study. And we're actually at the beginning of doing that with the School District of Lancaster, recognizing that that is a major barrier for single parents and an important economic development driver. So issue number 2 was around educational and simplified permit process. and I wanted to follow up on that as well. We have one existing policy that supports this goal, and it's GLU2, Customer Focused Development Services. I've pasted it beneath here. And this is really focusing on creating an efficient, customer-friendly, understandable permit process for development, and to also establish integrated review process for boards, commissions, and authorities. Efficiency is really important for our economic growth, and the review process should achieve high-quality land development and urban design while recognizing economic realities and development costs. So that exists currently. What we did is we also added an action here, and that is to create a streamlined permit system. This is actually something that we're already in the process of doing. It probably will not go live until sometime next year, but we felt like it was important to further elaborate on what we're trying to do and linking these two things and making it very clear that this permit system should help achieve those customer-focused development service outcomes. We also, after speaking to our Chief Data and Technology Officer, who is right behind me, that's David, everyone. I meant to introduce him at the last meeting. David is our new Data and Technology Officer, and him and I actually discussed this specifically, and really think that a good permitting system can be used as an educational tool as well. So we're going to keep that in the forefront of our minds as we go through that process together. So the third issue was reduced parking requirements near transit. So staff does consider this suggestion a best practice that could be right-sized for Lancaster City. And we do think that there are some existing policies and actions that already address this potential nexus. So I've pasted two of them here. One is called parking, and that is to develop parking standards that respond to land use and transportation conditions. And of course, we discussed this last time, possibly eliminating parking requirements in the urban centers area and developing reduced parking requirements for mixed-use districts where alternatives to driving, such as transit, are available. So we think that this policy, alongside our transportation innovation policy, really do get at and support the idea that we should be reducing or consider reducing parking requirements in proximity to transit availability. That's the conclusion of my response to the comments from our last meeting, at least that I had in this presentation. There are two others I want to just briefly mention. One is I had a question from a commission member about whether the public, what the public's engagement looks like from here forward. Tonight certainly is the best opportunity to be able to comment on the draft plan that we have before you all, before action. The next opportunity really would be with the city council meetings that are coming up in October. The time between now and then is reserved for that 45-day review period for formal entities. So at that point, there won't be planned public engagement opportunities. We'll be gearing up for that council engagement time and making sure that as many residents as possible know about that and will be in attendance. The final issue that I was reminded of just today by Mr. Stoltzfus was the question about whether there was opportunity to extend the urban center a little bit further south from the downtown region one down, I think possibly either Prince and or Queen Street. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more. I think what I will need to do is spend a little bit more time studying that, and would be happy to convene a small group here on the Planning Commission to do that. I think that we can do that and possibly have the plan recommended for approval at the same time. And I can get into those particulars. But I think the general gist is, city staff tonight would really like to welcome the Planning Commission's unconditional approval of the plan this evening, and help us achieve the timeline that we've set out for this plan. And hopefully, you're all feeling comfortable with it at this point and feeling like many of your concerns and questions have been addressed. What could happen is that the plan could be approved, understanding that there would be some additional edits from here on. So certainly there are basic copy edit things that we need to do. There's some graphic polishing that we need to do. One possibility is that we include, in addition to that a subcommittee convene and help advise city staff on whether that urban centers district should be expanded further south. That would then become an administrative decision with the subcommittee from the Planning Commission. So that's my creative way of saying, certainly we want to continue that discussion, and I think are open to looking at that further, while also hoping that the train can keep moving this evening. Mr. Stoltzfus, any reactions to that since I received that comment from you?
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily advocating for that change. It's just I had asked that question a few weeks ago, and then unfortunately was not able to be at the last Planning Commission meeting. It does seem like a pretty big, a pretty significant change if we were to do that. So, and since I'm not necessarily advocating for it, maybe we could have a quick conversation now. I think my rationale in asking, or my reason for asking, was just to see if that had been considered by city staff, and if you had a rationale, with the recognition that, we have the Mosaic coming into that area, which will be, one of probably our largest residential building, the museum and all of the investment and traffic that will bring to, south of King Street, Southern Market. There just seems to be a lot of development happening, and so it feels a little bit strange to me if that wasn't considered. And so I was just more curious in what that conversation was like, but I'm not necessarily advocating for that.
Yeah. So I'd have to compare the two side by side, but my recollection is that this has grown a little bit beyond the central business district that currently exists. And if you bear with me, I can pull up a comparison for you. Just give me one moment. But while I'm doing that, I think I'll say that generally what we try to do in analyzing that is we tried our best to forecast development opportunities that would really lend themselves to creating an urban center, which is really defined by the presence of ground floor commercial in those areas and mixed use buildings throughout. So here's the current zoning map. It goes down to Farnham, and it's actually in between Beaver and Christian, that little chunk of central business district. And of course, I didn't provide street labels on this one. I might be able to find a version actually that has it. Sorry, bear with me one more moment. So actually, it looks like it has remained at that section. Mostly the same, with the exception of just a section that juts out. This R4 section, it looks like, got transitioned to urban centers here. Otherwise, that is the same extent as the current central business district. Let's move that over again. And you can see what we did actually is we broadened it. So that little chunk is the same, but if you go just to the block north, we've actually broadened it east and west. So we bring it out to the corner of, Lime, right? And Church, yep. And then out to Strawberry Street to the west. So this R4 chunk and this portion of R3 is actually changed. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question a little bit more specifically, since we didn't get to discuss that last time. I wanted to just dive into that and make that quick comparison for you. So while it was expanded south, it wasn't done in the same manner as this sort of corridor, which was really aiming to connect some other larger opportunities, primarily around the stadium. And then, of course, there's a gap here because it's Manheim Township. But then seeing that connect to the train station, and these being two major destinations and amenities, and there being, even a ride share in here, what do they call it, park and ride destination here. We were seeing the connection of multiple resources and corridors that maybe we didn't see in quite the same way. But again, I'd be happy to look at that in more detail if there were other commission members who wanted to dive into that with us.
I have a question about that. Is the downtown district defined by this plan, or is it kind of more nebulous, or?
There's a downtown investment district which is a financial entity that levies fees for all of the properties within it. That's distinct from our commercial business districts, which are our zoning districts and govern use and bulk, et cetera. And then this future land use map would basically create a template on which future zoning maps would have to match. So when we get to the point of redrawing our zoning map, it would be in accordance with this future land use map. That would be part of the comprehensive plan. So say if a developer came to us and asked to rezone a property down on South Prince Street, south of Conestoga, and they wanted to make it urban center so that they could put a 10-story building there, that would not be seen as consistent with this current draft future land use map. So that rezoning would likely be denied based on that.
How moldable is this? I mean, if this is the plan for the next 20 or 30 years, and this is guiding the zoning ordinances, can it come back and forth and change, though? I mean,
Yes.
This isn't set in stone, right?
That's right. It's not set in stone. The two logical points that this would be changed would be at a 5-year update, and then at 10 years, it would be a full update, generally in some cases even a rewrite. But it can definitely come back again, and the Planning Commission could, 2 years from now or whenever, review the future land use map, recommend amendments. It would go to City Council again, and it would be adopted as an amended future land use plan.
I got two things for you.
Yes.
The first one, just to connect on what we've been talking about, I'm not going to go into it too deep, but I will say, it would be interesting if, maybe if we get to that 5-year point, to see, at least in the comprehensive plan, the potential zones being a little bit more, I'm going to say, vague, because I just don't like the idea, here's where the line is, so nothing outside this line can be anything else. It would be interesting just for the sake of, as neighborhoods change, maybe it adapts in a different way. Outside of that, the only other thing I have is actually minor edits, because I think it's important for people to be recognized in the work that they do. So the 3 people I'm interested in talking about, mentioning to put in here, are our old friend, Mr. David Boehm, who's no longer with us. I noticed that he's not in here. Our new friend, Mr. Porter Stevens, since he's joined our Planning Commission. And Douglas, where the heck is your name and the rest of your staff? You guys are the whole reason this came together. I think it's crazy to not have you guys mentioned in this.
Thank you. Yes, I can definitely update the acknowledgements. And I acknowledge that city staff is not yet in the acknowledgement section, and a couple people have brought that to my attention, and we will change that. So if the commission were to take action tonight, again, I think making sure that we leave room for those minor edits to occur is important, and one of them can be including city staff and the acknowledgements. Thank you, because the city staff did work very, very hard and tirelessly on this project for 3+ years.
The city's lucky to have you and your staff.
Thank you, Mr. Dastra. I do want to just briefly respond to your comment about the zoning edges. Because I agree with you completely on that, and maybe the urban center shouldn't just stop and right across the street a new district begin quite in that stark way. And I just want to remind us of this draft economic development map. What this helps to do is really bridge some zoning districts. So, for instance, these Main Street commercial corridors are intended to feature a mix of land uses and typically have established pattern of commercial development, which may be continuous or intermittent. Medium to high density development is desired on Main Street corridors, and city agencies and organizations should continue to direct resources in these areas. So to me, what that says is that despite the zoning, the land use that it's crossing, we need to be looking at the intersection of these two things. Our goals for this being a Main Street commercial corridor and the underlying future land use district, and really seeing it as a blend of objectives there. So this garnered a lot of interest during a lot of discussion during our comprehensive plan creation, and actually there was an earlier iteration that involved a type of street network that would help guide form and function to some degree, and where we landed was on this map, serving as a tool to do the same thing. I thank you for the question, and I think it's great that you mentioned that, because we were very curious about it.
So just to tackle on that, because the only reason I commented is because you said about like someone wanted to go get rezoned or something like that. So maybe they can't get rezoned, but this sort of tool that you're showing us now might be, it might be a case for them to ask for a variance or a special exception for certain other uses.
Well, keep in mind, this is just policy direction, it's not zoning code. So when we do create the zoning code and we get into those districts and the more specific regulations, what we could do at that time is create zoning regulations that allow for maybe a more logical step down of building heights, or allowing for more commercial along certain designated streets. We haven't gotten that far in our thinking with the zoning code, but there are definitely tools that we can develop to accomplish that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Douglas?
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, for my own edification, regarding the Main Street commercial corridors, what was the process that you went through to identify the streets to be selected as that?
Yeah, great question. So we worked very closely with Lancaster City Alliance on this. We already have a hubs and corridor map through Building on Strength, which is the city's economic development plan that we have with them. So this exercise was really conducted with LCA as a core partner, since they really are one of the main drivers of that plan and its implementation. There are some sections that were added here. So I don't have the original map that committed to memory, but over the years, they actually extended some of these corridors to the city's edge. So we wanted to make sure that we captured that in our map here. And the portion that has not appeared on any of the Building on Strength maps is actually this leg of North Plum Street here. So that is a new addition. We see quite a bit of redevelopment opportunity there, of course, with the former Fulton Bar and Hotel property and the roundabout intersection, which has quite a bit of commercial activity at it, as well as some of the other adjacent properties. So that was added. There's more to say about the other designations, but I think you were just asking about the corridors. So yeah, that's how we went through that process. But I think primarily, building on strength, tried to identify areas where they felt like there was either a cluster of existing commercial activity or potential for it to be grown in a particular direction or leveraged. So that's really what those corridors reflect, and there was a lot of engagement with the private sector to make those determinations as well.
And Douglas, this map is really helpful, and I think it's helping me to articulate a little bit of my concern with the land use map. So, I think this is changing, but, historically, we've had a lot of disinvestment in our southern neighborhoods and south of King Street. And, if you look at this map, a lot of the planned investment is north of King Street. If you think about how much we invest in our downtown and not considering extending downtown much south of King Street, I think, this is just raising, some concerns about equity and some of the historic disinvestment that we've had in the city. So just wanted to add that comment.
Yeah, sure. And if I may follow up, is this map in particular concerning to you, or is it mostly the future land use map and not seeing the urban centers extended south?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, if you look at this, we're identifying 3 potential commercial hubs south of King Street, 4 commercial corridors. But then if you look north of King, it looks like there's significantly more areas identified as potential kind of commercial hubs and commercial thoroughfares.
Yeah, understood. I fully recognize that and understand what you're pointing out. And, I do think that what we really tried to do is be thoughtful about identifying areas south of King Street that we felt would really be transformative. And of course, Angleside and Sunnyside are 2 of the biggest ones. There, up here, there are basically, there are no lots the size of Park City Mall south of King Street. There is not a major highway in the same way. There was not a railroad up there with these sort of large properties like the rail yard at F&M. So there are some historic conditions that have lent themselves to these development opportunities being present. Certainly not for any desire to, exclude or not lift up opportunities that are to the south. But what we do see to the south is, I think some of our strongest residential neighborhoods, and wanting to lean into those being mixed-use neighborhoods and what they are. The zoning, the future land use map is allowing for significant amount of investment down here through the mixed-use zoning, and really leaning into allowing greater density, greater mix of businesses along all of these streets, and maintaining some of the industry that is available for job creation in the south as well. I really think one of the biggest assets that the south section of the city has, that of course the north section doesn't, is an incredible environmental asset and recreational center. And a lot of what is envisioned for the south, I think, I wouldn't want to overlook this vision for the riverfront as being a major complement to the south end of the city. Angleside, the county park, Sunnyside, Bridgeport, and going up north to Conestoga Pines. There's a lot to say about this vision here, but we really see this as a major economic driver for the city, and really a complete reorientation of how we think about the city, and how the city connects to the river is all through the south neighborhoods. So I know that I totally acknowledge what you're saying. I just wanted to help paint a fuller picture of some of the other ways we're looking at the comprehensive plan. I welcome other comments and thoughts too on that.
I appreciate the commissioner making that point. And I do understand what you're saying about there being, with the comprehensive plan, getting the input from city residents about seeing more green space. I think we have that opportunity, and to your point, where there's more in the southeast than there is north and east and west. I guess I would say it's kind of a compromise or a sacrifice maybe, because I still feel as if in the south, the southeast especially, that there has not been the opportunity to grow economically the way other quadrants of the city have been able to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Cook.
Could I actually ask another question? And sorry to circle back to the Main Street commercial corridors.
Yeah.
Has any thought been given, are there any plans to do any kind of additional, more targeted planning, visioning, community engagement along these corridors? And I ask that because, I guess in full transparency, I live on North Plum Street, and I think a lot of my neighbors would be surprised to see it designated as a Main Street commercial corridor, because outside of the roundabout area, which I'm excited for redevelopment opportunities in that location specifically, it's a pretty consistently residential street. So I think they might have questions especially with language of like meeting the high density development is desired on Main Street corridors. Not necessarily being opposed to that, but just kind of what then does that mean for our street and our neighborhood? So I was curious if the city was planning to do any kind of follow-up engagement or other planning activities on some of those corridors.
Yeah, that's a great point, and we definitely will be, and we'll probably be doing it through, in conjunction with Lancaster City Alliance. So it's my understanding that they've been waiting to issue I think what they're calling a recalibration of that plan until the comprehensive plan was concluded, because they wanted to make sure that they were in lockstep with what the comprehensive plan set. So given that would be an area that they would be adding to their work portfolio, and knowing how successful they've been in engaging private stakeholders, I'm sure that they will be doing that. I'm happy to follow up with them and just understand more about what their plans are for doing that. I think to some degree the vacant lots, now vacant lots, the demolished houses on 500 block of Plum, changed the calculus a little bit there as well. As Plum hits New Holland, there's a lot of commercial activity on New Holland Ave. So I think that there's some possibility for that to now work its way a little bit further up Plum Street with that redevelopment opportunity. From the roundabout north, there is more opportunity for commercial there and some existing commercial that's already in operation. So I think it's a good question, and definitely, I hate to just defer to Lancaster City Alliance, but they're really going to be our core partner in doing that.
I just got a comment on what we were talking about community centers. And, I can definitely understand where my fellow commissioners are coming from, but the observation I'm thinking on with looking at this map is that, we'll have to see how our community actually develops, but I do at least like how intentional it is about, like, these are community hub centers in the south part of town, and we're preserving ecosystem in the southeast parts of town, as opposed to like more north. You have these very regional. They're not necessarily focused on our neighborhoods, So I'm looking forward to seeing how these emerging hubs develop for the communities on the south end of town, because as opposed to those blue sections, these orange dots are like, these are focused on building the equity of our neighbors and residents. So, yeah.
I think your assessment is accurate, Tony. What we're, just to revisit that definition, these are medium-sized areas that can support moderate commercial activity and serve one or more city neighborhoods. These areas are significant but smaller scale development or redevelopment opportunities compared to regional commercial hubs. They're definitely neighborhood and city-focused services as compared to these other regional hubs, which are really, they're regional destinations. People are coming from outside. There are a larger suite of services, commercial, train station, major downtown. So, yeah, I think you're right in that assessment.
Emerging hubs just seems like such an interesting word when you look at Manor Street and Duke and Chesapeake as almost re-emerging hubs because they had been so much more and now they're forgotten. And it's like, oh, look. So I don't want to change necessarily the word for it, but they're almost re-emerging, aren't they? They're gaining back something that they once had.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. So I don't have all of the land use committed to history down here, but this, Duke and Chesapeake is where the Saka houses have just recently popped up. Brothers Grocery used to be down there, it was demolished now. There's a Fulton Bank that's going to be closed and redeveloped in partnership with Saka. There's the housing across the street. Parts of that area were actually former ash landfill, and Barney Google Row, some of you may know that a historical term, was a community of mostly African American and other immigrants from other places who had deplorable housing conditions and lived down there. Certainly those are not conditions we want to be, we want to be setting a new bar and really be elevating that community in a way that I think it never really has been before. And I'm extremely excited about the investment that Saka is making in that area, and really trying to set the record straight and create housing opportunity. Although this is, listed as an emerging hub, I mean, yeah, I think it could actually be something even bigger than that. When it is properly connected to the riverfront trails, I think that could really serve as a pretty tremendous commercial center and expanded neighborhood, right up the hill from County Park, and possibly beautiful new trails, and easily connected to Sunnyside and all of the wonderful things that are being envisioned there. On Manor Street, I don't know the land use history of this area very well, but right now there are more modern, maybe 70s or 80s buildings set back from the street, some auto repair, things of that sort. Commercial buildings with decent bones that could really be used well, but not great public infrastructure down there. There needs to be more connectivity to the Manor Shopping Centers, curb, sidewalks, street trees, better pedestrian facilities, traffic calming. That will help set the tone for a more pedestrian environment that would really support commercial uses more strongly in this section. A lot of people walk this stretch. For those of you who drive down Manor Street, it is amazing how many people walk in and out of the city into the Manor Shopping Center and other places, and to the park across the street. We're really acknowledging that the city doesn't necessarily stop right at our boundary, and we really see that as an important place to invest, probably alongside Lancaster Township.
Any other comments from the commissioners? Any public comment? Yes.
Hi, I have three comments that are sort of interrelated. I'm Alan LaFever. I'm the chairman of the board of Atlantis Communities. And we've done a project on second block of West King Street, as you know. And I want to thank the city, your planning commission. As a board, we had a lot of demand from our steeple view lofts, 36 units, good waiting list. And we had a lot of people that like our campus out in the rural area, but we had people that are aging that wanted an urban environment. But we had a little bit of fear and trepidation because it was hard to find a site. We finally found a site. We needed to demolish 2 buildings to be successful. We needed 7 stories, so we had a lot of questions about whether all of it would work. And I just want to compliment the team here in the city. Things came together so much better than we as a board were a bit fearful in stepping into that. And the other thing that I really am happy about, and it relates to my 2 questions. As you know, as you may know, it's a middle market product integrating some affordable housing. We started out hoping to do 8 units. With the support of the city, some grants that we got, and with our own fundraising, we were able to increase that to 10. So we have 79 units in the building, 10 of which are affordable, and they're integrated into our building. We're also able to bring back the Rendezvous Steak House in the first floor. So the accommodation of commercial first floor and above. So I want to compliment this group and the city in general for how that's gone. In the process, however, I've personally become more concerned and more involved in the need for affordable housing. We had a tremendous amount of applications for those 8 units. I mean, 8 times the level of what we have for regular middle market. And I'm just curious where the comprehensive plan addresses affordable housing and planning for that in the future. I'm also on the newly formed Manheim Township Planning Committee, Comprehensive Planning Committee, and I have the same questions for Manheim Township. But I would like to encourage the work that you do, and some of it's zoning, I realize, that we think creatively how to address affordable housing. What we're trying to do by integrating it into a middle market product, we think the numbers work. You can't build 100% affordable housing and make the numbers work. So we have to find a sustainable solution. Some of it is related to maybe requirements along lines like that, tiny houses, that kind of thing, in terms of zoning, maybe. But I just like to encourage. And then the question I have is, how would you see townships like Manheim Township and the work they do in terms of comprehensive planning, how would you see collaboration somehow with what the city does? Is there a process where that could happen? And don't have to solve that tonight, but I'd be interested in understanding that better. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. I very much appreciate your comments and your commitment to that project as well. It's very exciting to see that accomplished in the city. So I'll try to briefly address your comments here. Affordability is of the utmost concern to the administration, for sure, and a large portion of our ARPA, our American Rescue Plan Act dollars, were dedicated to affordable housing in the city. So that was one way we really tried to, deliver where we could when we had extra funds, which we typically don't. There are a number of policies in the plan that promote the use of city funding for affordability, for continuing to invest in critical repair programs that keep people in the homes that they're already in. So in some cases, people are on the verge of having their house condemned because a sewer line may have collapsed or something, and they don't have money to repair. So we're looking at creative ways of helping to fund those programs in better ways, recognizing that some of the best affordable units are ones that are people already own, that are out in the community. And I think also in many ways we need to be a little bit more creative about our development code and where where we allow multifamily. At the moment, our current zoning code is pretty restrictive about where it allows new multifamily, and most affordable housing in a city is going to be accomplished through new multifamily. So there are a number of other provisions there. We have many age-friendly policies throughout the plan too, recognizing the need for intergenerational housing, different kinds of units, so allowing more unrelated people potentially to live together, accessory dwelling units at the rear of yards to allow for either children or for older adults to live in. So there, I hope we've done a good job, at least at addressing the housing affordability issue as best as we can. In regards to collaboration, I think that is a wonderful question. We've been collaborating with Manheim Township, I think very successfully recently. The train station area plan is one example of that. And I think both parties really intend to follow through with some zoning changes there that would really help to expand and I use the word city as an organism, not as a governmental entity, but really expand the city in an appropriate way and around the train station. So I would say, affordable housing can be accomplished with Manheim Township if they were to, look at some of their own funding and ask similar questions to us about how we can be partnering and using our funding better. Change some land use codes or zoning codes in order to better facilitate housing creation in appropriate places. And that area around the train station is prime because there's transportation facilities available and there's main bus routes and there's sidewalks into the city and services can be accessed in the city that those new residents might need. And I'm happy to brainstorm other answers to that question too, because I think it's a wonderful question.
Okay, well, thank you, that's encouraging.
You're very welcome.
And thanks again for your help. The ARP money, in fact, helped us get 2 more units in the Landis Place on King, so
Wonderful.
thank you.
It's very good news. You're welcome.
Public comment?
Yes, thank you for your time, members of the commission and other interested persons. I'm really here on a thank you sort of mission. My name is Bill Steffen. I'm a member of the Lancaster Downtowners and vice president of the board. Lancaster Downtowners is a nonprofit organization that connects members who have chosen to live in and near the city of Lancaster to each other, as well as necessary support and resources to age well in the community setting. I'm speaking on behalf of our organization to support Lancaster City's comprehensive plan and to thank the city for involving Lancaster Downtowners in its development through Lancaster City's Age-Friendly Action Plan. Both the process and the outcome have included input from all interested parties in our city. The result is a plan of which we can all be proud. This was only possible due to the foresight and hard work of Lancaster City government and its departments. On a personal note, my wife and I moved from New Hampshire to Lancaster about 3.5 or 4 years ago now to be near family. We explored every opportunity we could between Arlington, Virginia and Lidditz, Pennsylvania for a place to live. It took 2 years of due diligence. It was Lancaster City's depth and breadth of artistic and creative community and its history of enlightened city management over a span of years, which really sold us as this is the place to live. Year after year, U.S. News and World Reports has ranked Lancaster as one of the top 5 places to retire. The values and priorities in our new comprehensive plan will help to maintain the high quality of life that attracted my wife and myself to Lancaster City. David Rouse, a widely recognized consultant who worked with the Planning Bureau team, said, and I quote, "Lancaster City is poised to become a national role model for smaller cities to include age-friendly best practices in their comprehensive plans. Thanks again to the city's Planning Bureau for incorporating the needs, perspectives, and assets of residents of all ages, assuring that Lancaster City continues to be a great place both to grow up in and to grow old in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stefan. That's wonderful to hear.
Public comment? Yes.
Can I make one correction to Mr. Sutton's comments? Lancaster was recently named number one for senior-friendly communities.
I just have brief comments. I'm a downtowner, so I thought you looked familiar. I've seen you. I've been involved in, again, the air conditioning gets in my voice. I'm sorry. I can speak better outside. I spent 3 years, intense years, for the 1993 comprehensive plan and 4 years for the Growing Together 2017 comprehensive plan. The city worked with Manheim Township. I think it like 10 municipalities to come up with a regional plan. But the implementation of the regional plan was not as good as the 1993 plan. I think because 93 was just the city of Lancaster, and with the multi-municipal, there wasn't as much focus on implementation. But I have to compliment the staff. I'm reading through the document. I might have a couple editing comments for you because I was an English major, and you're missing a hyphen in a couple words. So I was glad to hear that you're still doing some editing, but you'll see where the hyphen should go. But I think the staff is doing a great job, and I really compliment a lot of work, and I appreciate everything you've done as someone who had spent hundreds of hours with the last two comprehensive plans. So thanks for your great work.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Jackson.
Ms. Jackson?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion, but I'd like to also take a point of privilege about this comprehensive planning committee and the process, if you don't mind. Okay. I had the honor of being recommended to the comprehensive planning committee in November of 2020, in the height of COVID. I needed to know what this was, what this plan was, why hadn't I heard of it before, and who was leading the committee. Emma Hom never hesitated to call, email, or text me with answers, and I became very curious about what this could become for Lancaster. I learned a lot and accepted the opportunity to be part of the committee. In phase one, all meetings were virtual. I had not known any of the other 18 committee members. One was in the audience, but it seems that she's left, Ms. Lopez, unfortunately. And with the guidance of an outreach and community engagement organization with expertise in connecting diverse voices to impactful decision-making, we began to share our varied Lancaster experiences, including what we thought about the city, why we loved it or didn't, what we thought was missing from the city, and then began an engaging process among the committee and then an outreach across each quadrant of the community to ask those same questions and much more. I believe the process to be an intentional effort to include the varied voices of Lancaster City residents. Frankly, I did have hope for so much more participation of city residents and the school district of Lancaster. Hopefully, city residents felt the opportunity existed for them to contribute and to be included. Beyond phase three, the work put all of those pieces of information together, was presented back to the committee, then to the city in person back in May via live stream, and again in person, when the plan was shared with the city. The huge event demonstrated the committed effort made to capture the vision for the city, according to city residents. The culmination of the committee planning and the city's work to roll out this plan was exciting, rewarding, and leaves me hopeful for Lancaster to commit to being intentional in making it a city that all residents can experience access to safe, affordable housing, economic opportunity, essential public services, and green space. I sincerely anticipate that the city will make every effort to see these plans through, and God willing, I will be around to hold the city accountable in any way I can, so I can see the evolution of the plans. I hope that all residents will be invited to continue to be engaged for a greater Lancaster, and as intended since 1929, a higher life for each generation. I'm proud to be a part of this historic process with the committee and with the Planning Commission. And as a member of the Planning Commission, I motion to unconditionally recommend to the City Council to adopt this draft comprehensive plan known as our future Lancaster, with the understanding that the staff may continue to make minor graphic or typographical errors, edits to the document, including a hyphen, up to City Council consideration. That's my motion.
We have a motion on the floor.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Ready for the question?
Mr. Chairman, with a motion and a second, is there any other discussion by the commission?
If I could vote, I'd say yeah.
Yes.
Tim Stuhldreher, One United Lancaster. I would just be interested in knowing if the motion leaves open the possibility of an edit to the future land use map as discussed earlier in this meeting. Specifically, the expansion of the urban area.
Sure. Well, I'll add my 2 cents, but this is on the commission's to decide. I will say I certainly remain open to the condition that city staff, in partnership with a subcommittee of the Planning Commission, consider revisions to the urban center and moving it further south. And if the commission is willing to empower us to make that decision beyond this recommendation, then I think that is perfectly acceptable to me, and be happy to do that.
Should I then retract and restate, or just a modification to add that?
So, yes, I believe you can amend the motion, and it would need to be seconded again. And you can just say, with the additional condition stated by Mr. Smith to make it easy.
To add to my motion, I would like to amend it to include the land use map to be expanded to include the southern end of town.
Yeah, and for clarification, is that required, or is it conditioned on our consideration of that?
Conditioned on the deliberate, intentional consideration of the city.
That sounds good to me.
Okay.
We have a motion on the floor.
Again, I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Again, we're ready for the question. All in favor, let it known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Congratulations.
All right.
Well, thank you, Planning Commission. Thank you to the public too, who showed up to be a part of this process. I can feel the 15,000 interactions that led up to this moment at our backs here. And although they may not all be in the room, I know that they contributed to this plan. And that feels really good to sit here and to know that. And I'm really looking forward to working with the Planning Commission also on implementation and for a long list of items that we have to do after this Planning Commission gets adopted. One of the first order, or I should say, there are a few orders of business that I want to just sort of put on the docket for you. We have $50,000 of funding set aside for a small area plan for the East End neighborhood, which would include the prison redevelopment site. So we have, that's from DCED, and we're looking for additional funding now. So that process will be getting started probably at the beginning of the new year. We're also looking forward to moving ahead with Sunnyside and figuring out what an RFP might look like for investments there. That is also a very near-term goal and might even come before the prison plan, actually. And then the third one is working with you all on an official map, which should come out of this process, and we'll be looking at reserving land for trails, for community facilities, rights-of-way, et cetera. So that will be a very exciting process. So, and there are many other projects that we'll be working on, eventually a zoning code and subdivision land development rewrite after this. Well, I actually didn't come with long remarks prepared, but I just want to again say thank you and give you my heartfelt gratitude for everyone's contributions to get this plan to recommendation. Really appreciate all of your comments.
This is really awkward. I'm gonna be that guy. Yo, don't do, so I'm just saying, technically, we voted to amend the motion, and we just need to vote again real quick to approve the original motion that we amended. We had technically had a premature applause, and I apologize.
No, that's fine. Robert's rules rule. So I think we should do that just for, our due diligence and to be 100% appropriate about that. At Mr. Dastra's recommendation.
The motion is active, so we can take a vote.
Yeah, okay, the motion is active. So, Mr. Chairman, then that means we can make a vote on the amendment rather than a vote to establish the amendment. So let's do this one more time because one time wasn't enough.
A vote on the amendment.
Yes. Yes.
The motion has been amended.
Right.
And thank you, Mr. Dastra. So I think we just call the vote then.
Just call the vote, yeah. All in favor? Let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Again, motion carried. Congratulations again. Okay, other business? None?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just say, please mark your calendars for the October City Council meetings. I will send out reminders for sure. I'll have to make sure those get on the agendas, but tentatively, we're looking at October. If you haven't checked out the latest plan online, our Future Lancaster has an even more recently updated plan with prettier pictures and things. And if anyone wants to leave with a copy, I'm sorry they're unbound, but you're welcome to take one of these from this stack on your way out.
Thank you for the copy.
You're welcome.
Any other public participation? Hearing none. I want to take the liberty to congratulate your staff, Mr. Smith and your staff. You've certainly worked, tirelessly and diligently. And so I commend that. Yeah, I commend that. And also thank the public for being here. And the planning commissioners, for your support on this project, for your attendance at the meetings, and all of what you were able to do to move this forward. So I feel proud about this moment. It's a historical time for all of us, and I'm happy that Commissioner Cook was able to make the motion. I thought that was appropriate. So this is certainly a pivotal time and a good time for the city, and I look forward to this plan coming into fruition and being a better time and place for Lancaster City. So with that, do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor, let it known by aye.
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 Motion have it, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
I think we can call it. I'm gonna look that up in Robert's.
Yeah.